I just want to introduce Dr. Ryan Smith. He is an expert in family therapy and development. In his presentations, Dr. Ryan helps parents develop a better understanding of the world their kids are growing up in. His goal is to empower parents to walk alongside growing children in a crucial but often confusing adolescent life stage. And I will hand it over to you, Dr. Ryan.
Thank you, Christy, and thank you all for being here. It is a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to be with Allen ISD. I was saying, for those of you who were eavesdropping on our public conversation a minute ago, we were talking about what Allen does, what Allen ISD does, and I'm truly blown away by your guys' commitment to growth, your commitment to mental health. What you guys offer for your families and what you offer for your kids is going to reverberate for a really, really long time. So I'm always grateful to be invited to be a part of what you guys are doing. I brought a friend with me tonight, down on the bottom. Well, I guess she's on the bottom of mine. I don't know if she's on the bottom of your panel. But Grace Hodges is a colleague of mine who has an office in Dallas. She has some fairly specific experience for what we're going to talk about tonight. So we'll get to her in just a bit. But if it's okay with you, it looks like we've got like 19 people on. You are the 19 who are truly committed to family growth, and I'm thrilled to have you. I'm going to go ahead and dive into our topic. So I'm going to ask for my co-panelists to once again help me out here. And hang on.
Also,
now it went away.
I wanted to say while you're doing that, if you have questions, just put it in the chat, and then he will answer them. At the end, is that what you said you want to do?
He will, yes.
Okay, perfect. So just put them in the chat if you have questions and we'll get to them.
I appreciate you guys being here. I want to make sure that you're hearing some stuff. First of all, we're about to talk about balancing the demands of school and extracurriculars and your community stuff and your family stuff. And I want to make sure that you guys are hearing something, okay? I always start my presentations with Allen this way. I am a father of 2 sons. You will get no parent shaming in these conversations, despite the fact that many of you wonder whether this is your fault. You look at your kids who struggle with anxiety and who struggle with these the sense of being overburdened. And I think oftentimes when we talk about family-based solutions, parents can inadvertently get the idea that that we're blaming them or that you're the problem. And I want you to hear right out of the gate, we're in a very weird moment, and you are not in you're not in an isolated situation. It's not your kid that's struggling. It's a lot of kids who are struggling. I think we're trying to balance kind of a new way of doing everything with some of the old ways that we want to hang on to. And I think we're kind of struggling through that balance. But I wanted you to hear, if you are worried tonight about your kid, I hear you. I get it. I'm grateful that you're here. But there's going to be no parent shaming tonight. I also want you to hear this. You're going to hear a lot of family language. So when we get to the solutions part of tonight, you're going to hear me talk about family-based solutions. So I'm going to talk about things you can do in your home. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think that's one of the reasons why I get invited back to Allen, is because that's where we focus. We genuinely try to focus on the solution stuff. We could, if we wanted to turn this into a video chat where we just kind of bemoan the state of the world and we talk about how everything feels crazy and feels out of control, we could do that. But I really want to focus our conversation tonight on home-based solutions. But when you hear me talking about home-based solutions, I don't want you to get the misrepresentation that I'm saying that it's your fault that your kids are struggling. Okay, I genuinely don't feel that way. So I've said that. All right. I am, however, and this is probably the most important part, I'm a family therapist. And so when I talk solutions, I always talk family. Okay, so you may, by the way, I should put this as a disclaimer as well. You may have some stuff going on with your kiddo where you see maybe anxiety on a concerning level, or you see depressive symptoms on a concerning level. I want you to hear me tonight. If you have that fear, or if you're going through something like that, please don't take tonight as just the catch-all solution for what you need to do. It is entirely plausible that you may need to seek out some individual care for your kid. There's a lot of places you can do that. The school counselors can point you in the right direction. but I don't want you to hear tonight as just blanket, it's going to fix all our problems either. So now with those disclaimers, I want to get into the topic for tonight. So I'm going to put, if you are watching, and now if you're listening to me in your ears and you're in the car and you can't see the screen, I'm going to explain what's on the screen. But I have some questions on the screen that I wanted to hear from you first. Now, the chat is probably the best way to do that, and you can just put your answers in the chat. Okay, I just saw something that you may not have seen or may have seen. Every now and then, I'll put my thumb up and Zoom thinks, yeah, see, looks like I'm agreeing with myself. I'm not agreeing with myself. And if I do this, it gets really intense. So I don't know how that happened. I did not do that on purpose. And when you see thumbs, it does not mean that I just agreed with myself, although I'm not above it. All right, take a look at the screen you see in front of you. These are the questions I wanted you to ponder as we got into tonight. So the questions are, what does busyness look like in your child's life? What does it look like in the life of your home? What are the things that are vying for your kids' attention? And then finally, what pressures do you feel as a parent as we're going through these things? I wanted to give you a chance to kind of talk to me. I'd love to see in the chat. Christy, can you see the chat?
I can.
Can you read off some of what we get?
I sure can. Yeah, let me get back over here. The first one says, no teacher either. I teach in Allen and want to understand what my families face. My kids are grown and raised in Allen.
Yeah, sure. Got it.
Can you share the recording after the session? Yes, we will. Video games. Somebody put video games in there.
Yeah. What are the okay? So listen, what's vying for your kids' attention is video games. I want to tell you this, and it's a point that I make only to hopefully validate the struggle that parents are having as it relates to video games. If you jumped on the call a little bit early, you may have caught the tail end of our conversation. My wife runs an outdoor school. And so on our property, we live on a farm with goats and pigs and chickens and horses. My kids have access to like horses that they can ride on horseback riding trails. If you give them the choice of doing anything, you want to guess what they would choose? If you tell them on a Saturday, there's nothing going on, you can do whatever you want. I guarantee you, they will want to play Hogwarts Legacy, and they'll want to do it on the Xbox that's in their room. So I say that because I want you to hear, as a parent, wow, do I relate to that. Video games are absolutely vying for your kids' attention. We did a tech presentation recently with Alan. I'll do another one, I'm sure. That is a huge issue. I couldn't agree with you more. And what else are we getting in there?
Constantly doing things, hopping to one thing to another without a break. Social media and Discord.
Did you say social media and Discord?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Hey, we're going to touch on every one of those.
Okay.
Anything else that's kind of outside those themes?
Let's see. Busyness looks like having so many activities and commitments that there's no room left on the calendar for anything else or for an appropriate amount of downtime.
Can I, okay, not only, I'm with you, but can I rephrase the end part of that? It said for an appropriate amount of downtime. How about any downtime? Because I do think that a lot of us as families struggle to find any real degree of downtime. Or at least that's our perception. And we're going to look at that tonight too. Okay, anything else we're seeing?
Yeah, there's like 5 more. Fear of missing out, fear that the kid isn't doing enough of activities to build a sellable profile for college applications and finding themselves who they are. Busyness is felt when there are things my kid doesn't want to do and things my kid would rather do.
I hear some struggle, man.
That's all I'm seeing right now. Wait, hang on. If downtime is filled with TV, it doesn't feel like downtime because time wasted.
Yeah. Okay. So let me respond to all of those by simply saying I feel you. I'm going to guess that every other parent on this call can relate to every one of those statements that was made. So whether we're talking about social media or we're talking about college applications, it's a different time right now. We're in a different place. And to me, it's really valuable that we're having this conversation. Let me encourage you in this regard as well. What we're going to talk about tonight, I don't know. I can't guarantee this, but I think we're going to address every one of those things that just came up. Because as I was listening to what the concerns were, I'm logging when we get to the application piece here in a little bit. I'm kind of logging what we're about to talk about, and I truly think we're going to cover everything. If we don't, you can Q&A. See, look, even I agree with myself. We'll get to the Q&A towards the end, and if we miss something, then please don't hesitate to holler. But parents, I hear you. I am struggling with the exact same stuff. For many of you, you are on this call tonight, despite the fact that Game 7 starts in 15 minutes. So the idea that there is always something that is vying for our attention is something you're not alone in. For the record, things have changed a bit since we were kids. And I know that we all sound old when we say that, but it's true. Things have changed a bit since we were kids. They haven't changed as much as we think they have, but the technology is novel. And so the accessibility is novel. But I wanted you to hear tonight, we're going to get into everything that you just talked about. All right. I told you I want to focus primarily tonight on what to do. But before we get to that, I do want to spend some time on root causes. Okay, so if you want to, this is my only slide for root causes. Everything else after this is going to be application. I have one slide for root causes. So let's talk about it. First of all, we are dealing with a social media paradigm for the real world. Okay, when I say a social media paradigm, I want to explain what I mean. I'm going to touch on something that's actually way deeper than I could possibly get into tonight. And the only way that we could get into it tonight is if you want to commit the next 2 hours to like deep philosophy, right? And I don't think anybody wants to do that. But one of the results of the digital world that we are raising kids in now is that we're creating a social media paradigm for even the real world. I want to explain what I mean by that. Digital natives, which is what your kids are, they grew up in this world. They grew up with technology in their pockets. They grew up with the world at their fingertips. Digital natives have a tendency, if they grew up on social media and if their adolescent life took place on social media, the definition of social media is that it attaches value and worth to what people see, like, and validate. Okay, so that's their true self-worth and definition comes from what people can see, like, and validate. Where I think we've missed the mark is I don't think we understood that that was going to carry over into their real lives as well. That same mentality of I am only worth what people can see, like, and validate is one of the reasons why we feel pulled in so many different directions. Because do you know what that means? If your paradigm for the world is I can only truly be valued for things that other people can see, like, and validate, that means that sitting under a tree and reading a book is probably not something you're going to dedicate a lot of time to. It means that drawing for the sake of drawing, just for you, it's probably not something you're going to dedicate a whole lot of time to. It means that sitting in your bedroom and learning how to play an instrument that you're terrible at, but learning a little bit at a time and doing it just for the sake of doing it because you like that instrument and you want to grow in that instrument is probably not something you're going to dedicate a lot of time to. Now, why is that? And the reason for that is because we've created a social media paradigm where kids are growing up believing that the only things worth giving their time to are things that people can see, like, and validate. I can promise you this, if you spend your free time and you spend your life giving yourself only to things that people can see, like, and validate, you're going to feel exhausted. And so for us as parents, we have to be willing to see that in our own lives and help our kids work through the same thing. The next thing that we're running into is digital interference that creates feelings of busyness when it's not there. All right, parents, I'm going to talk to you about you for a second, and then I'm going to help you relate it to your kids, okay? If you ask 20 of your peers, okay, I'm talking parents. If you ask 20 of your peers, how's life? My guess is you're going to get some variation of the answer, super busy. I'm really busy. I'm really busy. Again, I'm agreeing with myself. See, even my Zoom thinks I made a great point just then. You're going to hear variations of how busy you are. Okay, here's what's interesting about that. In terms of work schedule, you're accessible more. But statistically speaking, working hours have not gone up to the dramatic rise that we think they have. Now, accessibility has. We're going to get to that in just a minute. But one of the reasons why we feel exhausted all the time is because we do have downtime and quiet time built into our day that we have given away. And I want to explain what I mean. I mean that if I were to hook your brain up to a bunch of electrodes where I could watch your brain as you engage with social media, digital media, news, whatever you're watching, whatever you're scrolling through on your phone. If I could watch your brain, what I would see is it gets really amped up when you start scrolling through the feeds that you're looking for. There's a dopaminergic reaction in your brain. That dopamine drive is what makes you, it drives you towards behaviors. All right, so I say that because in all chemical reality, when you get on your phone for 30 minutes, you're kind of ramping your brain up. Okay, so now imagine for just a minute that your brain jumps on a hamster wheel every time you have a chance to take a break. By the end of the day, of course, you're going to feel exhausted. Of course, you're going to feel like you had no time to connect to anybody. Of course, you're going to feel like you didn't finish any projects because every time you had a few free minutes, you threw your brain on a hamster wheel that left you feeling exhausted at the end of the day. Time spent, there was a comment made in the chat when we first started that time spent on TV is lost time because it's wasted. Okay, first of all, I don't know that I fully am quite there, only because there are times where the purpose of TV is to engage in an activity that is shared with the people around you. Okay, so for example, me and my kids watching a movie this weekend all together, I think was good and valuable time. Now, TV that's just kind of zoned out, you're doing nothing. Maybe there's no benefit to that in terms of like productivity, but maybe the benefit is the downtime. Now, that said, your phone interacts in a different way. In the TV, with a TV, you generally have to commit to a specific window of time. With your phone, it's only in like 3 to 5 second bursts. And so you end up feeling more exhausted when you aren't. All right, so I just spent a lot of clinical language to say something really simple. What I just said was, you have more time than you feel like you have. But when you have it, you give it away to something that gives you nothing back. It makes you feel angry. It makes you feel anxious. It makes you feel left out. It makes you feel isolated. It makes you feel not as important. It makes you feel scared. And so when you spend your downtime on that hamster wheel, you can't be shocked when the end result is you feel like you don't have any free time. All right, next one that we see. Now, this is one that I want to make sure that you hear. I am with you. I agree. Parents, those of you who tell me that, well, right, college is crazy expensive and the cost of living has increased so dramatically that I need my kids to do well. They're fighting for scholarship money with, thousands of kids for a finite amount of money. I don't have a solution for you for that one. I genuinely don't. Other than I want you to be cautious about the way that you talk to your kids about this. And the reason I want you to be careful and cautious about the way that you talk to your kids about this is because there are times, I think, where we know as parents, scholarship money is going to be really important because I don't want my kid to start $150,000 in debt. But I also don't want us to inadvertently create in our kids an anxiety that if they don't pass this one history test, they don't get to go to college. That can create a pressure for kids that is impossible for them to overcome. If your comment to me is, but we need them to get scholarship money, I hear you. But if you need them to do well in school, putting so much pressure on them that they can't succeed in school is not the solution. The solution might be additional tutoring. The solution might be additional downtime within your family. We'll get to all the potential solutions later, but I do want you to hear the solution for the shocking increase in how much it costs to go to college should not be to wear our kids out with that reality. All right, next one. For the record, Alan has never once told me what to say, as evidenced by the fact that I've said things in the past that they probably didn't love. And I'm saying that because this particular point is one that Alan ISD, Christy and I, we've not talked about this. And it's one, but I think they respect the fact that I'm honest with parents. I am honest with you about the fact that the increase, there seems to be a statistical increase in the frequency of homework. I was in the classroom when we started doing, Christy will remember this, I was in the classroom when flip model, when that was like the whole thing. The rage was the flipped classroom. Okay, I remember that was in like 2006, 2007. What that model was we were told that it's a really cool model to have kids watch the content and learn the content at home and then come to school and be able to work the content with the teacher. Okay, well, theoretically, that's a great idea if you only have one class. You're doing a flipped model classroom and have 7 teachers. That's really hard. You're asking kids to learn an awful lot of stuff at home. Okay, so we're working through that as school districts. I am a champion of education. I know that our hearts are in the right place with what we're doing with kids, but at times we do get it wrong. And I think that public education as a whole could probably stand to reevaluate the role that homework plays and the frequency with which we assign it. That said, we're not alone in that, because your job is doing the exact same thing. What I mean by that is it has become a professional expectation that an email will be returned within what's an expected time? 24 hours? Is that about right? Even on the weekends. I'll give you 24 hours, but the expectation is that you'll respond. Some of you work in tech. Some of you work in the medical profession. Some of you work in professions where the expectation is you're available 24 hours a day. And if you don't respond, it's a professional problem for you. Okay, I don't know what your professional situation is, but in so much as you can protect your family's downtime, I want to encourage you to do that. All right, there's another, by the way, I'm putting the problems. I want to remind you again, we're about to get to all the solutions. We're also in a weird specialist culture and economy. Let me explain what I mean by that. For generations, when kids struggle with a particular skill, the solution was to do that skill more. Now, in the mode that we're in, parenting-wise, our solution is find the professional that will train my kid to do this thing. I find that to be a really alarming trend in the way that we parent. It's not as common anymore for if a kid doesn't know how to throw a baseball, we don't go outside and throw a baseball with him. We go online and find a baseball coach who is doing private lessons, and we'll drive him to the private lessons 4 times a week for an hour a pop for $150 a pop. And we think that's the best way to work with kids. Now, for the record, if your kid is destined for professional athletics, that probably is the best way. That would also mean that your kid is in the 0.02% of kids who have a shot at ever making money at professional sports. But that's not the conversation today. The conversation today is we do have the specialist culture where we do believe that if a kid needs help with something, they need to be sent to a professional no matter what. Now, there are certain things that certainly need a professional. I can help my middle school kid with math, kinda. But only kinda. I'm guessing some of your kids struggle with physics and you don't know how to help. Okay, you might need to outsource that. But I want you to hear your kid does not have to be in a travel everything and in a specialist team everything. The reason that we've gotten to this place is because there's an economy that's being built around it. You know what? My kids play youth sports. I struggle with youth sports culture. And the reason I struggle with youth sports culture is there are an awful lot of teams willing to tell parents, if you'll just pay this team $4,000, your kid will get a lot of exposure. I would encourage you it's a great season for the Rangers. Check out Evan Carter's story. Evan Carter's parents refused to play the travel ball game. And he's the starting left fielder for the Rangers. If your kid's good enough, he's going to make it with or without the travel teams. All right, so let's take a look at the last one. The last one is one that I actually wanted to hand it to Grace for a minute for. Grace is a colleague of mine who has a unique experience. I'm a little older. How old is completely irrelevant, and I'm offended that you would even ask. But I'm a little older. Grace is a little fresher out of school, and Grace worked as a time in a college counseling center. And so this was actually one that wasn't really on my slide initially, but we talked about this topic and she brought this up and I thought it was valuable. So Grace, can I hand it to you for a second to talk a little bit about this phenomenon?
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, Ryan brought this up to me. He was telling me about this presentation he was giving. And this is the first thing that popped into my mind because first of all, I resonate very strongly with the struggle that kids face, not just, especially coming out of high school and into college with figuring out, okay, now I not only have to balance all of classes and all of this homework, but now I'm balancing living on my own. We're counseling center. There were so many students that were coming in with just increasing. And I had a lot of clients who just struggled with really high levels of stress because of that. And as I worked with them, though, I noticed something really interesting that I didn't necessarily expect to see. And that was that busyness wasn't just something they were really struggling with, they were trying to get rid of. It was something that they viewed as a virtue. It was something they saw as a badge of honor for them. And that goes back to what Ryan was saying earlier about social media and the impact of that. And people think that their worth and value comes from what people can see and validate. So a really busy schedule and a really packed schedule and doing a lot of things, it makes students feel like they have a lot of worth and value. And so I didn't just have clients coming in who were really overwhelmed and stressed and busy, and they were trying to figure out, okay, how do I fix this? How do I solve this? How do I take more off my plate? They were really busy and overwhelmed and stressed and coming in, and they kind of liked it because they like to be able to say, oh, look at how much I'm doing, and look at how busy I am and how stressed I am. And at that point, creating balance is an uphill battle because rest is something that is totally foreign to them. It's something that's deemed as unproductive and kind of lazy. So rest by itself is tied to feelings of shame and busyness and hectic schedules. Although it's exhausting them, it contributes to their own sense of worth and value. And I always wondered with these clients, I'm seeing them away from their homes. They've moved away from their homes and they're living on their own now. But I always wonder, what did the culture of rest look like in your home? Because you didn't just come to college and suddenly start getting super busy. I wonder if this is something you learned or something that you were kind of soaking in for years now. And that's exactly why I love that all of you guys are here tonight. And I love that this is the topic that you're all taking time out of your evening to listen to, because the work that I did with students in the University Counseling Center was somewhat reactive. I had kids coming in who did have this belief that my worth and value is tied to my busyness. And then I had to sit and say, okay, let's realize that's what the reality is. Now, what do we do about it? But the fact that all of you guys are here tonight, that's proactive. You're asking questions that are so important about how do we work with our kids and fight against the cultural belief that is taking root in them about busyness and being overwhelmed and stressed. How do we work against that before they leave home? And that's so important because as the parents, as the leaders of your home, you set the stage for how your kids view the balance between work and rest for the rest of their lives. And so that's why I just also want to say, I admire all of you who are here tonight to listen and to learn. That is so meaningful to me, who worked with kids who struggled with this, to know that there are parents out there who care who care a lot and who want to dedicate their time to find strategies to help their kids. And that's what Ryan is going to talk about next.
Yeah. Well, so Grace, I want to mention one thing. You talked about busyness as a virtue with kids in a college counseling environment. I told you guys when we first started that I tend to think in terms of families. That is not a problem that is isolated to kids. Parents, whether we're willing to admit it or not, many of us feel as though our worth and value is based on how busy our schedules are. We have glorified the phrase grind. We have glorified these terms that I get the meaning. Work hard at stuff. That's good. That's a good lesson to get. I'm not advocating for laziness tonight. I'm not advocating for shirking responsibilities. I am, however, saying that I would love for us to value presence in a current moment and relationships in the way that we tend to value things like professional grinds and things like being busy. All right, so we're 7:03. I'm going to keep us as close to our time as possible. So I want to get to the part I know you're probably most interested in. How do we help? I'm going to give you some concepts for your kids, but they are concepts that I hope will benefit you as well. This is, I do believe in trickle-down mental health. I believe that as parents can kind of get a handle on their existence and their schedule, and if parents can begin to operate from a healthier perspective, asking your kids to do that is much, much, much easier. Okay, so please don't hear tonight just from the lens of how do I help my kid. Okay. There's a reason that we're told to put on oxygen masks first before we help our kids on airplanes. I would encourage you to consider that as we're going through the next couple slides. All right. The first thing I want you to do, if you have not done this yet, tonight is your challenge. It is time to define your family value system. And then you're going to utilize that when you're making decisions about how you spend your time. Define your family value system. It is not enough to say, if I ask you, what do you value as a family? It's not enough to say, people, downtime, connection, relationships. We'll use these kind of broad catch-all words because it sounds good and it sounds about right. But most of us, I'm not going to say many, I'm going to say most of us have not sat down to do what I'm asking you to do on this slide. Now, here's the good news. The good news is I don't ever let stuff hang like that. So I'm going to show you, you want some steps. I'm going to give you some actual, tangible, hands-on questions. If you're a screenshot person, this is the part you're going to want to screenshot. Okay. Here are the questions you are going to discuss beginning tonight. No, after game 7. So either late tonight or tomorrow. At some point, you're going to want to have these conversations. So here is, and also depends on who wins and who's a fan of who in your home. So there could be a lot of tension as the night unfolds. But if you have a moment where you're not discussing game 7, here are the questions that you can ask as a family that are going to help you define your value system. Okay. First of all, what are our most important values individually and as a family? I'm going to ask you to do something weird. I want you to actually rank order those values. Okay, now I don't know what that's going to look like for you. You will notice I am not offering you a template for this. I don't even have an example. The reason I don't have an example, my values might not be your values. What me and my family are all about and what me and my family try to identify as may not be true for you and your family. So I want to give you the freedom to define these words in a way that works for your family. If you had to ask yourself, what are our most important values as individuals and as a family, and then rank order them. Now, here's why that matters. It matters because when there are conflicts for your time, I want you to have a frame of reference to know if I value something way more than something else, I probably need to prioritize it on my schedule. So for example, if one of your values is close family relationships, I assume that's probably a fairly common one. I'm going to guess most of your family value systems isn't going to involve, militant individualism where we battle each other at every moment. I'm going to guess most of you probably have some level of family connection as a part. Okay, if you're going to do that, if family connection is in the top couple on your family priority list, and then if sports is not as high, then when those things are in competition and you recognize one of them has really suffered because the other one is getting in the way, maybe it helps you make some decisions. Maybe occasionally it's okay to say no to certain things so you can say yes to other things. Now, we're going to get to that here in just a minute on how we do that a little more effectively. But you don't know what to say yes to and what to say no to if you don't have a defined value system. Okay, so the next question is, how does your schedule reflect those values? So I've got my values. I'm now evaluating. I've been a clinical therapist working with families for 15-ish years. It's been really funny. And I say funny because usually I can get the family to laugh about it and see that there's a problem that we can fix. And it's not the end of the world. That's why I call it funny. I'm not laughing at other people's struggles. But I routinely ask people, tell me what you value most as a family. And then they'll give me these really pretty answers. And then I'll say, when's the last time you did something that reflected those values? And they're like 3 years ago, there was this really awesome stretch of 3 weeks where we got it done. Okay, so I need you to ask, does your schedule reflect your values? Folks, if your schedule doesn't reflect your values, you will always feel burnt out. And now, I'm not saying it's going to be perfect. So your individual value system may not include physics homework. However, your schedule should reflect your value system in so much as it is possible. Again, it's meant to be a guide for your family. It's not a rigid, you can't always pick the higher priority thing. All right. Next, it seems like a common sense question, but you'd be shocked at how often this happens in our families and we don't ask it. Are there things that you give a ton of your time to that you don't actually value? I I'd love to be a part of that conversation with your family, just because I do this a lot with families, and watching them work through this and watching them answer these questions and say, wow, yes, we give a ton of time to these 6 things that none of us really value. Why are we doing it? And the answer is, I don't know. I thought we were doing it because you wanted to do it. I thought we were doing it because our family. So having a conversation about whether or not you give your time to things you value or don't is important. The next question is kind of a no-brainer. Are there things that you really value that you don't give as much time to as you would like? All right. So when my boys were really little, now they're still little. They're 11 and 8. But it started when they were really, really small. One of the things that I would say that I valued as a dad, I valued reading to my kids. It is one of those things where school librarians and teachers will tell you that there's a huge benefit to every child on earth when adults sit and lovingly read to them. So that was a value that I had. Well, a question that I had to ask myself was, yeah, but how often am I doing it? And the answer was not nearly as much as I would have liked. And so it was a part of this conversation that prompted even my own family to say, we really say we value this thing, but we're not really doing anything that aligns with that value. I'm going to say this again. If there are things you really value that you're not giving your time to, you're going to feel burnt out. All right. Next couple of questions. We're not done. I got 2 slides of these questions. Next couple of questions. What would a healthy family schedule look like? Okay, so this is a good conversation for you and your family. What would a healthy family schedule look like? For you, it's going to look different than it looks for me. There's a certain amount of free time that I want on my schedule. There's a certain amount of rest time that I want on my schedule. But I want to be able to talk to my family about how much individual time they need and how much family time we need. And once we do that, once we have a concept for what a healthy family schedule looks like, I need to ask a real simple question. So what do we do to make that more of a reality? All right, a couple other questions for you to consider. This one's going to start some interesting conversation if you can have it with your teenagers. What does it mean to be successful? You know what's interesting? If your kid plays football, or is in the band, or is in a theater, and you say, what does success mean? And they say, I have to be all state, or I have to be first chair, or I have to have the lead in the play. Okay, you've just set your kid up. Your kid is setting him or herself up for the potential for devastating hurt. If their only definition of success is the highest level, there's not a lot of wiggle room there. So being able to talk to your kid about how you define the word success is really important. Parents, what does it mean to be professionally successful? Does it mean that you are the highest grossing salesperson in your region? Okay, well, if that's the case, there's going to be a lot of grind attached to that. Does success mean that you've got a level of financial independence that allows you to take some vacations and to spend some time together with your family? Okay, that might change the way you work. Is success just having stable income? Does it mean that you know where meals are coming from and you know what bills are being paid? Knowing what that word means to your family is vital. Here is why. We've already talked about the fact that your kid is doing 19 different things. If the goal or expectation is that they'll be successful at all 19 of them, again, you're setting yourself up for a recipe to be burnt out. Next couple of questions. If we could, this is like the if aliens came from space question. If we could only use the way we currently spend our time to define what we actually value, what would it tell us about what we actually value? Something that has really kicked me in the teeth lately is I have had to really struggle with the fact that I asked myself this question not that long ago. Grace can attest to this. We're colleagues, and she notices a lot that my notifications are turned off a lot. I'm not available a lot during the day. And one of the reasons for that is I asked myself this question not that long ago. And one of the things that resonated with me was, if you only looked at my schedule, what matters to me is my work. And that's not what matters to me. Don't get me wrong. I love my work. I'm here for a reason. But what matters to me is my family. What matters to me is my children and my wife and my ability to be the kind of husband and father that I want to be. But if you looked at my schedule, what mattered to me was clinical work and speaking engagements and stuff outside of that. So it prompted me to scale back what I do professionally. All right, a couple other questions for you. If you could make one change to the way you spend your time, what would it be? I would love for you to have that conversation with your kids. Next, if you could make one change to the way we spend our time as a family, what would it be? And then finally, what are the relationships that matter most to us? And what kind of time do they get from us? If you're not having open dialogue about these questions. So this is, again, the part where I would hope that you would screenshot and you would be able to ask and talk through these questions as a family. I'm going to give you the takeaway. The goal of these conversations is define your family value system so that you have something to operate from. Okay, but that's not all. That's the entry point. The entry point is defining your family value system. Okay, we've got a couple other places we're going to go. Next, I want to help you create a culture of rest. Grace, I wanted you to cover this one because I think it fits really well with what you were describing a minute ago. So take it away.
Yes. I love all of those questions, and that leads perfectly into the reason you're asking is to kind of investigate that question of how does your family practice rest? And I mentioned earlier that you're figuring out a way, being proactive to how do we prevent our kids from being swept away in this culture that what you do is who you are, and that's very much against a strong cultural tide in the Western world. And, I always had a quick way of identifying with students, whether or not that was a deep-seated belief they had. What I do is who I am. And I would just ask them, how do you like to rest? And in the cases of students who really struggled with rest or who really struggled with putting their worth and value in their work or what they do and their achievements, they could not answer that question. Rest was, again, such a foreign concept to them. They either couldn't answer it or they would start giving me a list of things that was just productive things that didn't sound very restful at all. Or they were just so surprised that they had no idea how to answer it. So I pose the same question to all of you. How does your family practice rest? And if you have trouble answering that question, or if you've never thought about it before, then that's probably a growth area that you could think about. And that's something that you can talk to your kids about. Same with all of those questions that Ryan was mentioning earlier. Ask your kids for ideas, because rest isn't just sitting and staring at a wall, or it's not just taking a nap. And that's why I put this picture in here, because rest can be playful. My family loves to play board games, and that is a really restful activity for us. But every family's different. And I will say, you need to know what can your family handle, because if Monopoly turns your dining room into the New York Stock Exchange, then I would not recommend that. But if you can find some games that your family loves to play together, that is a restful activity that takes their minds off of all of the demands that are being thrown at them throughout the day. And that's so important. And some families enjoy bike rides. Some families really love movie nights. And to Ryan's point earlier, I think there was something in the chat about somebody saying, that TV feels like it's wasted time. And it seemed like what you were getting at was the difference between rest and leisure. So rest is mindful, leisure is mindless. And when you have leisure all the time, it does feel like the time just slips right through your fingertips. Mindful rest is something that you pay attention to. That's why an activity like a board game is something you're not just sitting there letting time pass. You're actively engaged. And so that's why, depending on how you watch TV, it can be a mindful activity. If you are watching something as a family and enjoying it together, I enjoy watching a good Christmas movie just as much as I enjoy seeing my family laugh at the same things. So that can be a mindful thing depending on how you approach it. So it looks different for every family, and you can be creative and brainstorm and ask your kids for ideas. And as you involve them in prioritizing rest, that's so important, because they're learning that their weakness and that rest is not weakness and it's not laziness. It's very valuable. And here's why that's important. A worth and value that's based on achievements is unsustainable. Ryan was kind of touching on that earlier. Burnout is inevitable. Your kids are going to face failure in their lives. They're not going to get everything that they set out to do. And if they are burnt out and exhausted, but the concept of rest is equated with weakness, they will not know what to do with themselves. And then they will just keep seeking out more validation. And so a subtle way that you can maybe make a change, a subtle change that you can make in your homes that can help with working against that cultural expectation is just observing, how do you measure the worth of a day in your family? How do you measure the worth of a day in your home? Because I would imagine a lot of you, and I do this sometimes, I'm guilty of this as well, that when you ask somebody about their day, you say, what did you do today? And you may not be asking with the intention of getting a status report of all of the boxes that were checked on there. But that's usually how people tend to answer that question, which is, what did you do today? If the answer is, I read, I feel like that's the wrong answer. So an alternative might be, how was your, or what were 3 highlights of your day today? Tell me your favorite part about today. Tell me your least favorite. Just looking at the day in a different way, because I know that seems like such a small thing, but it does set up a mindset. I'm constantly the day of, okay, what did I accomplish today? What did I get done? And if I didn't get everything done on my list, make sure harder to get everything and it more than you think. So these are just really small things that can make a huge impact on your child's sense of worth and value and their entire perspective on their life.
That's great. Grace, thank you. That rest versus leisure. I actually didn't have that definition, so I'm going to steal that for sure. You're not invited to my next gig. All right. So, folks, we got 10-ish minutes and we got plenty more we're going to cover. So let's look at some other things that you can do. Next, I want you to work through your time budget. This is one of those other concepts. Now, I gave you, I'm going to give you an example on the next slide as to what I mean by this. But it is something I literally threw together. I don't have a template for you for this. I've done my own with my family. To be honest, didn't really want to share that one. So I just have kind of a template for you guys that works for us. But I'm not giving you a blank one. And the reason for that is because I don't have a blank one to offer. And I didn't find one. As I was looking through online, I didn't find one that I thought was universal enough to work for everybody. But I will tell you this, you can Google search time budgets and you'll get an awful lot of options. So if you're looking for options, here's what I wanted you to see. What I wanted you to see is that if you consider money and time is a similar concept of money where there's a finite amount of it. You've got 24 hours in a day. Have you ever sat and truly looked at what your expenses are, your non-negotiables, and then seen how much you have left over? Okay, for example, for this particular example, this person is sleeping 8 hours a day. So we already know that this person lives in some sort of fantasy. But it's 8 hours a day that this person's sleeping. You'll notice that on the weekends, we don't have school on the schedule. On the weekdays, we do. We've got a half hour for getting dressed, so clearly not a teenager. We've also got extracurricular, and you'll notice throughout the course of the week, some things change. So for this particular example, kid, Tuesday is like performance night and the other days are practice nights. We got 2 hours plus 4. Now you add in an hour or 2 of homework. You add in a little bit of flex time. We run out of time fast. Okay, so here's why this activity is really valuable. And here's why it's been valuable in my own family. I did a time budget probably 6 months ago. So like the rest of you, during 2020, my time budget was wide open. The whole world. I had all the time in the world. And then when things started to ramp back up again, I think there was this hunger to kind of get back into normal and get back into busyness. And so I did something that I'm sure a lot of you did as well, and it was wheels off. It was, let's get back to whatever the grind was and get back to normal. Doing a time budget about 6 months ago really opened my eyes to something. What it opened my eyes to was, and maybe for the record, maybe we're just there's 51 people on this call. Maybe this is just a little private therapy session between just the 53 of us or 55 of us. But if you probably pick up on some of the themes here, I struggled about 6 months ago with the idea that I was not giving to my children the way that I would like. And so doing a time budget really, again, kicked me in the teeth. The reason for that is because I realized I only get a really small window of time with them every day. So parents, how much time do you get with your kids in the course of the average day? Like actually get with them? The answer is probably not that much. It's one of the reasons why, if you were in my tech presentation, it's one of the reasons why I encourage families to have a no phone usage in the car policy. Okay, I know that that is like starting World War III for some teenagers, but the reason that we don't use phones in the car is because how often do I get a captive audience with my children? And the answer is not very often. In that little box when you're driving from point A to point B might be the only window that you get during the day where you actually get to talk and converse with your child. Now, if your response is, right, well, they're on their phone. If you were in my tech presentation, parents, that's on us. I did a technology presentation like 2 weeks ago. And afterwards, one of the moms came up to me and she said, well, what do you do? Like, my daughter, I went ahead and gave her a smartphone and she's lost in that world now. And the girl was in 7th or 8th grade at middle school. And she said, I can't really put that genie back in that bottle. And I said, why not? And she said, well, because I've already given it to her. And I said, right. So undo it. If that's where we are, if it's taking time away from you and your kid, if it is detrimental to your kid's mental health, yeah, you can backpedal on that. It's okay to say, we tried it, it's not working. Now, for the record, I don't say that lightly. A lot of you parents just heard me say that and you thought, that is insane. They're gonna start a fight in my house. There's no way I'm doing that. For the record, I had an hour-long presentation literally on addressing that specific thing. It is a delicate thing. You are exactly right. But it doesn't mean it's not an important thing. But if you take a look at your time schedule, parents, tonight, at some point, even if you're just doing it mentally, I want you to ask yourself the question, how much time do I get with my children? How much time do I get with my family? And if the answer is not that much, then you need to be really cautious about the time that you do get. All right, next one is going to be hopefully a little less controversial. Have an off season and stick to it. Parents, it is not our kids' fault that they think they have to be in year-round stuff. Most of you grew up in a world where you played every sport, every season, or you played no sports, no seasons. You grew up in a world where you had summer times to enjoy being a little kid. You had weekends that you enjoyed playing and climbing trees and doing things that were natural and around you. You had time to kind of wander around your neighborhood with your friends and to play. You had time to do things that was unguided. Have an off season. My family schedule, my kids are not super big sports guys, but there's one particular sport they really like. We play it, but we force an off season. There will be a time during the year where there's nothing on their schedule. And the reason for that is because they need to have time to be little. Some of you may be thinking to yourself, right, but my kid's 16. I get that, but even still, having a downtime is really, really important. Have a family off season and stick to that family off season. I don't think that's a pipe dream. I don't think that that's something that that a family that is unattainable to most families. Now, the off season, maybe it may not be possible for you. Your work schedule may be such. I work year round, like most of you do, I'm sure. So I don't really get an off season from my professional life. But when my kids have an off season, it does change the way that I interact with my professional schedule. So I would hope that you are able to, at least on some level, create the same kind of commitment. Next, I want you to learn when and how to say no. Remember we said at the beginning to create a family value system? Learn to say no to things that don't enhance your family value system if they don't benefit you or someone else. Now, to be clear, there are times where altruism is really valuable for a family. What do I mean by that? There are times when your family needs to give of themselves just to give of themselves. In fact, I think that's something we do less of today than we have in the past. So maybe don't say no always to things that aren't in that value system, but learn when you're feeling burnt out. Learn that saying no is really, really, really important. You don't have to be aggressive and hyper. Okay, let me give you an easy way to say no. An easy way to say no to somebody is, I'm sorry, that doesn't really work for us, but thank you for asking. It doesn't really work for you. There's a weird pressure we feel to lie when people ask for our time and we don't want to give it to them. Do you feel that? I'm not going to ask for hands or like to put it in the chat. A bunch of you have gotten text messages and thought, oh, crap, I got to make something up. No, you're an adult You don't have to make something up. You can just say, thanks for asking. I really appreciate it, but that's not going to work for me this time. And you can graciously step away. You don't always have to come up with a lie. My own wife has said to me before, like, I'm going to have to tell them something, which means we have to be busy. I'm like, hold on. So I got to be busy because you don't want to do something? No. Just tell them you can't do it. We're all adults here. It's okay to say no every now and then. Next, I want to encourage you to organize smarter. You will notice, and I only gave 2 examples because I started it and it gave me anxiety. There are 2 different to-do lists in front of you. There is a to-do list and a today list. I encourage you to consider both. Okay, have something similar to there's a to-do list and a today list. That helps you prioritize. Your to-do list is kind of ongoing projects, things that you know are on your schedule that that eventually you're going to have to encounter. And then there's the today list. Today is this has to be done today. You know what's interesting? Once the today list is done, maybe move something over from the to-do list, knock that out, and then call it a day. Give yourself the ability to enjoy the rest of your day. Your today list will not be as long as your to-do list. Now, if you don't get to your to-do list, then that today list is really going to pile up. So we want to try to work through that today list. All right, I want to be respectful of your time, so I'm going to move pretty quickly through these last couple. Sleep and movement are huge when it comes to balancing work and life. I get it. I'm guilty of it too, so you're not alone in this. Parents, we do not need to always decide that sleep is going to be the one that gets sacrificed when our schedule gets busy. Okay, so I want to encourage you to value sleep more than you do. Value it in your kids probably more than you do. Here's some ways that you can do that. 1, we cannot fall asleep to screens. That's not a good habit, and it's not good for your kids. If you were in my tech presentation, I'm going to say this, and you heard me say it then. Screens should not be in a kid's room at night, whether the kid is 6 or 18. Screens in a teenager's room at night will prevent them from sleeping. And that's the beginning of the problems. Okay, all of the problems on the other end of that are much worse, but I would encourage you as parents to be kind of militant about that particular thing. Next, beds are for sleeping. They shouldn't be for homework. They shouldn't be for playtime. They shouldn't, in your bed is not where you should be working. And I know that feels weird to a lot of parents, but there is something about your brain remembering what it does in certain locations. So when you lay in your bed, it should be for sleeping. The last one is a tough one because there's a massive cultural shift that has to take place here. I think we should not stigmatize kids for catching up on sleep when they can. Biologically, and I did have a bunch of science I wanted to share with you on this point, but not shockingly, I've talked more than I anticipated. But your kids, your teenagers need more sleep. Neurobiologically, they need more sleep. They need 8, 10, 11, 12 hours, depending on where your kid is neurobiologically and neurodevelopmentally. Parents, it's not a sign of weakness or laziness if your kid sleeps in super late on Saturday. Okay, it's generally a sign that they're worn down and that their body is trying to rest. They're not resting because they're lazy. They're resting because they're tired. And so I would really like for us as parents to maybe move beyond stigmatizing kids who want to sleep in. Next, by the way, sleeping in means when they have the chance to sleep in. It's a little different if you've got somewhere to go. Next, I want to encourage you to move more. So, one thing, if you do nothing else, if you ignore the rest of the presentation or you've been watching the game, if that has been the case, the one change you can make that will allow you and your family to feel more connected, less pressure, and less pulled in 1,000 different directions. The one change you can make is try to walk outside more with 0 digital interference. I saw an article on Yahoo, I think it was, a couple of weeks ago, and it had some weird name for kids. Kids are learning to walk without their iPhones. And I kind of laughed. Because that used to just be walking. And that's what we did prior to cell phones, but that's all right. If Gen Z needs to have invented that, that's okay. I'm going to let them have that one. And then making family movement a family commitment. All right, I got a couple more for you, then we're done. Stop trying to multitask. Ooh, some of you are going to fight me because you've been multitasking for the last 53 minutes. Multitasking is a myth and it doesn't exist. If I were physically in your presence, I would duck behind the podium because I know some of you are going to get really defensive when I say that. Here's what multitasking is. Your focus, I want to do the science. Your focus is an impenetrable laser beam. It cannot be divided, which means when you are multitasking, you are not multitasking. You are doing something referred to as fast switching. Okay? Now, there's a book called Stolen Focus that will help you understand that concept, but there's a whole chapter on fast switching. It's called fast switching. What that means is you're not doing two things at once. You're doing this thing, and then you're doing this thing, and then this thing, and this thing, and this thing, and this thing. And what we know is for creativity to thrive and for productivity to thrive, you have to be able to concentrate and get into something called a flow state. Fast switching prevents a flow state from ever happening. You ever tried to write a novel? You ever tried to write a paper? You ever tried to write something super creative? You ever tried to paint something? You ever tried to write a song? You ever tried to make a video like where you're recording something? Those require something called a flow state. A flow state is where your creativity comes out. And what's crazy about that flow state is when you experience it, you feel happy. Endorphins are released into your brain. Fast switching will prevent a flow state from ever taking place, which means whether it's a paper, whether it's a homework assignment or a work project that you are working on. If you are working while also looking at your phone, while also having the TV on, you are fast switching. You will not get into a flow state. You will be less productive. All right. If you want to fight about that, hang on just a few minutes and I'm going to open up the questions and answers. Last couple. Actually, this is the last one, and then I'm going to give you a recap slide. I'm doing pretty well. I'm within 5 minutes of where we're supposed to be. Celebrate victories, especially small ones. Folks, I'm going to talk really bluntly to you for a minute. We all have expectations of our kids. Our kids feel those expectations. You know what makes me sad? A lot of kids in our world right now only have two feelings: anxiety about what's coming or relief that it wasn't as bad as they thought. That's it. You know what doesn't exist? Oh, look at that. I didn't know I could do that. I don't try to remember that. Was that what that is? So here's what doesn't exist. When all you feel is anxiety or relief, you know what doesn't exist? What doesn't exist is joy. And what doesn't exist is happiness. Whatever you do in life, you did not do anything big. Okay, I'm going to give you this is for your kids, but it's for you. Parents, hear me because I need you to share this with your kids. There's no such thing as a big accomplishment. It doesn't exist. Okay, I'm going to give you a really big one. Graduating from medical school sounds like a big accomplishment, right? It's not. It's not. You know what it is? It's a whole bunch of little accomplishments. It's getting in, it's writing every paper, it's taking the tests, it's doing the labs, it's doing the internships and residencies. It's a bunch of little tiny victories. And then they all got packaged up into one big package, and we called it a big accomplishment. Parents, every accomplishment you've ever experienced in your life, none of them were big. All of them were the collection of little tiny things that we all put a bow on and said, that's big. Okay, here's why that matters. If you don't celebrate those little victories, you're missing like 90% of your life. I don't care how small your victories are, celebrate them. If you have, after this conversation tonight, if you make small little change in your family, celebrate that change. If your kid does a little better on a school thing than they did last time, celebrate that victory. If your kid gives you a little more attention today than they did yesterday, celebrate that. Teach your child to celebrate small victories. You know why? Enough small victories will eventually create a big victory. They're not going to have one big giant success outside of all the small ones. So if you can't celebrate the small ones, you'll never get to the big ones. So parents, if you want to help your kid balance this cascade of expectations that's being placed on them, if you want to help them balance the world around them, one of the ways you can do it is giving them the ability to celebrate their small victories. And here we're going to recap this whole thing, and then I'll stick around for questions and answers. Explore your family value system. Work through a family time budget. Give yourself an off season. Say no when it's necessary. Organize and organize better. Sleep and move. Single task, not multitasking. And then celebrate small things. Let me tell you what we didn't cover. What we didn't cover was change the world around you. I realize you can't necessarily do that. What I'm asking you to do is to control the things that you can control to the best of your ability. Parents, I am in this boat with you. We all feel pulled in a million different directions. We all feel exhausted. We all feel like we're failing on some level. We are not to the degree that we think we are. We've got to be better about helping our kids celebrate their victories. We've got to be better about families understanding who they are and living that out more effectively. All right. I appreciate your time tonight. For the record, I think this is the closest I've ever been to sticking on our schedule. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen with you now, I think. And then once I do that, yeah, there we go. I'm going to stick around for questions and answers. I haven't been able to see the chat, but if we can go to If you
There are
have
a couple
questions, actually,
questions.
yeah, I'm looking at them.
Okay, okay.
Okay, I think I can see it now. Let's see. By the way, those of you who, if you're done, that's all the content. If you need to go, you're not going to hurt my feelings. For those of you who'd like to stick around and do some Q&A, I'm going to be around for another 15, 20 minutes. Okay. We got to the business part. Okay, we got, when I have an evening work call with China, does it affect my kids' downtime too? It can. It can. It kind of depends on the nature of how you do that. So when you have an evening work call, are you doing it in a place where your kids have to be a part of that? Are they hearing it? Are they affected by it? If the answer is no, then no, you're probably not affecting your kids, other than the fact that they don't have you. But that said, it's a work call. If it's a work call, then it's not really super optional. So I would encourage you to do the best you can to not let it affect your family, but recognize that it might on some level. Does playing a sport count as rest? Man, it sure does to my family. Absolutely, yes. Does playing a sport count as rest? Keep in mind, Grace did a really good job of rest versus leisure. Again, that concept kind of blew me away because I had not considered the fact that rest is mindful and leisure is mindless. So a sport is mindful. It's you doing something. So as a way to rest, absolutely, yes. A sport, if that's how your family rolls, then yes, a sport can absolutely be downtime. With a teenager, how can you let them know about rest and leisure? So here's the thing. The conversation we had tonight, Christy, I'm going to send you the PDF of the slides and you're welcome to email it out. I would encourage you parents to kind of talk about this with your kids. When I hear things that affect my kids, one of the first things I want to do is I want to talk about it with them. Here's what I heard. Does it affect you? What do you think about it? For the record, and again, I keep mentioning the tech presentation because it does play into these things. But if you go home after hearing one of these talks like a cowboy and you kick in the door and you're like, I heard some stuff and we're going to make some changes around here. If you do that, you are going to be doing it wrong and you are going to be starting a fight of which I will not be responsible. What I would encourage you to do, here's a great question. Here's a great way to have this conversation with your kids. Here's what I heard. What do you think? So giving your kids a chance to talk to you about it, I think is really valuable. But truly, the answer to your question of how can you let a kid know the difference between rest and leisure, I'm going to go home tonight and I'm going to tell my family rest is mindful and leisure is mindless. So family board nights, family board game nights, or throwing the Frisbee around. We went on a little hike the other day. That's rest. Leisure is Hogwarts Legacy, that my kids are still obsessed with Hogwarts Legacy. So that would be leisure. Okay, next question. How long does an off-season need to be? Listen, you're going to have to answer that question. I don't know what your in-season looks like. So off-seasons should be enough to where you feel them. Our off-seasons usually are quarterly. So we'll do at least 6 to 9 weeks at a time. But again, it's really, it has to do with your family rhythms. So if your family rhythms are such that a 3-week off season sounds like an off season to you, then by all means, again, that's for you guys to figure out. I also think it's valuable to ask your family that question. So, hey, I heard this idea that we need to have a family off season. How long is a family off season? My kids would probably say something different than I say. And so for us to try to find that midpoint would be valuable. Okay, question. What types of computer games do you recommend that improve brain reaction? Oh, goodness, I don't. There aren't any that I directly recommend. Okay, so let me preface that. I do realize that there are things like Luminosity was the first big one, but there's apps and stuff that are designed for brain functioning, and they've shown some efficacy with Alzheimer's patients. I haven't seen a ton of literature yet that shows efficacy with young kids in terms of improving brain reaction. What I will tell you is when it comes to digital stimulation at all, I prefer less stimulation the younger they are. So in other words, if you're talking about games, so the word games is in the question. Games like Minecraft Minecraft is kind of an immersive experience, and there's a lot of open world games like that. It's not creative, but like there's the Zelda games are like open world format where there's not a lot of rapid screen change, and there's not a lot of rapid fire succession type stuff. That for me is a much better way to spend digital time. But in terms of recommending brain games, digital brain games, I don't have any that I specifically recommend. Luminosity kind of started that. I actually did that for a while. I thought Luminosity was an interesting concept. It was an app, if you're not familiar with it, it was an app that was designed for cognitive functioning to like increase reaction and complex problem solving. If I'm being honest, I didn't see a ton of what I think it was billing itself as. So I think we're still kind of in a literature gray area there. So I don't really have anything that I'm going to fully recommend for that. Any other questions that you've got for me, or for Grace, or for Christy? Hey, Ashley, I can see that you're talking, but you weren't. I couldn't hear you.
I'm sorry. I just have a child next to me.
It's okay.
Making lots of noise.
Oh, okay. Hey, how about memory games? Yeah, those. So some of those basic memory games, like the card memory games, yeah, those can be really good, especially for little kids. So if that's what you mean by memory game, yes. But there's a lot of different apps and a lot of different options for that. What I will tell you is I don't have any that I recommend specifically, but do your research. Do a little bit of investigating. Common Sense Media is a good place to do some research. They've kind of gone away from their free structure, and now they're a bit more of a pay structure. But there are certainly some digital options for memory games. Again, I don't have any that I've used enough to be comfortable recommending. And frankly, I prefer cognitive stimulation. But yeah, memory games, there are some really good options out there. I would encourage you to pursue that.
Can I add to that?
Anything we're missing? Yeah, Grace, go ahead.
I was just going to say, all the concept of improving brain functioning doesn't even have to be limited to computer games. But I mean, there are definitely board games out there that you could play with your child. And one that came to my mind is Mastermind is the board game. It's an old one, but the person picks a sequence, and then the person across from them is trying to guess what that sequence is, and they have to put in all the different tries, and then they tell them how close they got, and then they keep working at it. I mean, that improves brain functioning and increases them thinking outside the box, being creative. So if your goal is to just help your kid to improve their brain functioning, there's a lot of different ways to do that.
And Grace, to your point, doing it in an analog fashion, which is that non-digital option, it not only increases the cognitive function you're trying to increase, but it also increases face-to-face interaction and negotiation. So this is a part of the tech presentation that we didn't cover tonight, but one of the reasons why our kids struggle with anxiety in this generation more so than in previous generations, one, we're better at spotting it, so that plays a role. But two, on average, the number right now is 30,000. And what I mean by that is your child, our children will have, on average, by the time they're 18, will have had 30,000 fewer face-to-face interactions than most of us had who grew up in a non-digital world. Okay, so when you grew up in a non-digital world, something that was really powerful for us was you couldn't, we mentioned this, I was with you guys a couple of weeks ago when we talked about anxiety. You couldn't function. You literally could not survive without engaging with another human being. Okay. If I was going to stay in my house for weeks at a time, I was going to have to call somebody to get food. I was going to have to go to a grocery store. Something was going to have to happen that was going to involve me talking to another human being. Our kids don't have that reality. In truth, they could do everything with their phones and never have to speak face to face with a human being. That is not good for their cognitive development. So those of you who are looking for like digital options for increasing brain functioning, it's not a bad idea, but keep in mind cognitive, which means not online, not digital options, are going to also create those face-to-face interactions. Parents, let me give you one other one that's going to help with some of the feelings of anxiety. As best you can, if you're one of my parents on this call who has little kids and they're not quite teenagers yet, as best you can, every time they're in a grocery store, Don't go to the self-checkout. Go to the checkout line and have them talk to the person checking or swiping their groceries. Have them talk to the waiters and waitresses at restaurants. Have them buy their own movie tickets if you're still going to movies. Have them interact with adults as often as possible with you there with them. It is not uncommon for me to be in a store buying something to hand my debit card to my 8-year-old and say, you go take care of it. We were at Culver's a couple of days ago and they wanted to go get ice cream because it's Culver's, and no self-respecting person would go to Culver's and not leave with a concrete mixer, right? So we're sitting at the table and they said, we want concrete mixers. My reaction was to hand my debit card to my 8-year-old. He's 8. And to say, you go order them and pay for it. So he felt confident enough to walk to the front and to say, tell him what he wanted, and then put in the debit card. He knows my PIN number. That might be a problem at some point in our lives, but for now he's 8. We're cool. But the idea is I'm hyper aware of the fact that our kids are growing up without a tool that we all had. We all had the opportunity to engage with human beings as a part of our regular life. Your kids don't have that option. That's not fair. They don't have that expectation. So for you as a parent to do the best you can to try and create some of those expectations would be really super valuable. All right. Anything else I can do for you guys this evening?
Hey, Ryan, there was a question in the question and answer. It said, sorry, I joined a little late. What does off season exactly mean? Is this without being on a regular schedule? Usually during summer holidays, allowing kids to be free on their own. Is this correct?
Yes, absolutely. Off season means that you have a season of your year where you don't have to get somebody to practice right after school, or where you don't have to go to rehearsal, or there's something where you have time where, and it might even be, look, I want to be gracious to those of you whose schedules are truly crazy outside of your control. Okay. I know I've been in Allen enough times. I've talked to you guys enough times. Some of you are in careers where it's truly not an option. Some of your kids are in activities where they had to commit to kind of an insane schedule in order to get whatever status or profession they've got, whatever role they've got. I'm sensitive to that. It is possible that an off season means you have a weekend where everyone turns off all their devices and tries to spend a weekend just connecting and breathing and resting and being outside. And that can be an off season. Now, it's not really what I'm thinking when I say off season, but for you and your schedule, listen, I don't want to, you know what I'm about to do? I'm about to inadvertently create more anxiety. There's a bunch of parents who now I'm telling you that you're supposed to put these things on your kid's schedule. Otherwise, your kid's going to feel high levels of anxiety. Remember where we started. I'm not blaming parents. I'm just trying to give you tools. So an off season looks like whatever you need it to look like. A weekend at its minimum, maybe a couple of months at its maximum. I don't know what your schedule looks like. Is there a week or two out of your year? Is there a month out of your year where you and your family can say, our job is we're going to go to school and we're going to go to work and we're going to come home and that's it. For a couple of weeks, that's all we're going to do. Nobody's going anywhere else. There's no more demands of our time. And in that time, we're saying no to everything. When things get really busy for us, a family rule that we've made is during the winter months. So January, February, March, I can't, I'm not allowed to say yes to anything on Saturdays. Okay. So that Saturday is protected time. Now that may mean we're busy other times. So if you're unfamiliar with the therapy world, the winter, January can kind of be your busy season for two reasons. One, people are driven inside more. The days are shorter. It's colder. And so that does tend to exacerbate people's mental health. And then number two, people have made it through the holidays, which is a really hard time for a lot of families. And as a result of that, January tends to be when we get an awful lot of people who made it through the holidays by looking at each other and saying, when we get to January, we'll go to therapy. But for now, just be nice to my parents. So we get a lot of that starting in January. But as a result of that, we really protect Saturdays. We can't protect Sundays as much, but Saturdays are a day that no one's doing anything. I'm unreachable. The phone is off. My wife's phone is off. Our kids are off their devices. It is truly connection time. So an off season can look like whatever it needs to look like in your family. I was kind of intentionally vague about that, but whatever works for your family. All right. Anything we're missing? All right, Christy, I'm going to hand it back to you then.
All right. Yeah, I don't see anything else. Well, I just want to thank you, Ryan and Grace, so much tonight. We really appreciate it. And thanks for answering all the questions.
Look
Oh,
what I did. See?
you're going out with a bang. That's hilarious. All right. Well, we appreciate you guys, and I don't see anything else. So we will let you all get on with your nights. Thank you so
Thanks, guys.
much. Have a good night.